It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. A Prime Minister on a collision course with parts of his party as Rishi Sunak prepares to put his asylum and migration crackdown to the vote. Pull the bill, rebel Tories tell him, but others say they'll back his plans as the government warns that going further over Rwanda would breach international law. It means the Prime Minister challenged tonight on two fronts over his small boats policy as well as his pandemic support, encouraging us to eat out to help out.
2325.
And this as we discover the extent of the overspending emergency in the NHS, facing a near £5 billion bill.
1.5, your North Star, is it still visible right now?
Also tonight, phasing out of fossil fuels, the anger at the COP climate conference over weaker commitments to cut carbon-intensive energy. Another British driver injured in a crash with an apparent member of the American military who was allowed to fly home. The fans making mincemeat of the professionals finding out the identity of the woman at the centre of one of World War II's greatest acts of deception. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello, good evening. You might call it Rishi Sunak's nightmare before Christmas. The Prime Minister told bluntly by some of his most right-wing MPs to pull his Rwanda migration bill. It goes to the vote in Parliament tomorrow night, and if they were to vote against, Rishi Sunak would likely lose. Well, the government says it won't withdraw the bill and that making it any tougher would be a breach of international law. The Prime Minister himself wasn't able to make his case personally today as he was giving sometimes tetchy evidence to the COVID inquiry. More from there in a moment, but first, our political editor, Beth Rigby, has this report.
This perhaps the Prime Minister's hardest week yet. Pressure on all sides. Rishi Sunak arriving at the COVID inquiry to face questions about past decisions.
Is this crunch week for you, Prime Minister?
While his political future is being decided back in Westminster. Here, an unfolding nightmare for the PM as right-wing Tories kicked off the day, declaring his Rwanda legislation unworkable. 5 different groupings of Tory MPs to the right, advised by a star chamber of lawyers that the bill simply doesn't cut it, and firing a warning shot to the PM.
The bill provides a partial and incomplete solution to the problem of legal challenges in the UK courts being used as stratagems to delay or defeat the removal of illegal migrants to Rwanda.
The question is about whether or not you can vote for or against the bill or abstain. What's the position at the moment?
The feeling very much in the meeting is that the government will be best advised to pull the bill.
If the Prime Minister presses ahead and loses the vote, how can he carry on as PM? Is this a confidence issue now?
I'm not going to get into hypotheticals.
How much of a challenge to his authority is it if he cannot get this legislation through his own backbenchers?
I think, Beth, you can ask the Prime Minister that one.
The verdict dire, but Number 10 pressing ahead with its legislation, taking the unusual move of publishing its own legal position that the bill can't possibly go further. This minister put in front of camera to make the case.
I'm convinced, because of the government's legal position that we've published this afternoon, that this is the toughest piece of legislation, that this does meet the concerns of the Supreme Court, and we're going to have that robust debate tomorrow afternoon.
Behind closed doors, the Home Secretary making the case too at a private meeting with MPs. And by the evening, the mainstream One Nation grouping ready to give their verdict, declaring they will back the bill.
We had a sober discussion, we've got concerns about this bill, but we want to get behind it and get the Prime Minister so he can get the bill he's proposed through without any amendments.
And your message to right-wing colleagues?
Get behind the Prime Minister on this, be loyal on this.
It's been a hectic day around here, different groups of MPs shuffling to different meetings, trying to decide what to do about this Rwanda bill. Well, tonight the Prime Minister did have a win, with moderate MPs saying they will support him for now. But on the right of the party this evening, over 40 MPs saying the legislation still needs major surgery. So the Prime Minister is still not out of the woods. A crucial 24 hours await him in which he tries to save the bill and himself. Tomorrow the PM will host a breakfast here for right-wingers as he tries to woo them and win this critical vote. Defeat not an option, but he knows too that victory tomorrow won't end the war.
Well, Beth is in Downing Street tonight, and Beth, less than 24 hours to go to a vote which could define Rishi Sunak's future. Where do we stand then as of now?
Well, I think where we stand is it's another critical 20 hours or so for a Prime Minister fighting to get this second reading through Parliament. To put it into context, no government has lost the second reading of a bill since 1986. So this is really uncharted territory now. Tonight, the Prime Minister, of course, hugely relieved to have won the backing of the One Nation caucus, the moderate mainstream MPs, and a source in Number 10 telling me tonight that this is the only option to get the flights off the ground, this bill. One source saying it's time to deliver. The overwhelming weight of legal opinion is that this bill works and will be an effective deterrent to stop the boats. We need to pull together and get on with it and take the fight to Labour. But there is still a matter about what the right of the party will do. I was speaking to some right-wingers tonight saying that they don't really like how the government is handling it. They feel that they are having a gun put to their head, as one put it to me. Now, tomorrow morning, the Prime Minister is going to host a breakfast here in Number 10 at 7:30 in the morning, when he's going to invite 20 or so of those right-wingers to try and press them to back this bill. And I think we'll get a sense later that morning of where they stand. But I think also the thing to say about it, as one senior right-winger put it to me tonight, even if the PM wins tomorrow, it is, to quote this person, a Pyrrhic victory. And the reason I say that is that it will be a row, delayed, not resolved. If he gets it to the third reading and it starts going through Parliament, there will be all sorts of moves by those on the right to try and amend the bill, to change the bill, and it's still unclear whether ultimately the Prime Minister can get this through the party, which is now, I can tell you, in a civil war.
Early start for all of you by the sound of it. Beth, live there in Downing Street, thank you. And my colleague Sophie Ridge will have a specially extended Politics Hub programme tomorrow night, 7 p.m. until 9 p.m, here on Sky News, bringing you the vote on the Rwanda bill. Well, the Prime Minister made his name in part because of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, reducing prices in pubs and restaurants in the early months of the pandemic. But today, Rishi Sunak said it had only been a micro policy. The government's most senior scientists have criticised the measure, but the Prime Minister said they had had ample opportunity to raise problems with it at the time. Our political correspondent, Maura Cohen, reports.
At the COVID post-mortem, the Prime Minister began with an apology.
I just wanted to start by saying how deeply sorry I am to all of those who lost loved ones, family members through the pandemic.
The economic intervention that I'm announcing today is unprecedented in the history of the British state.
Back then, Rishi Sunak was the brand new Chancellor, whose furlough scheme supported millions of jobs. But where others have described dysfunction in Number 10 and frustration with Boris Johnson, he didn't see it.
My interactions with Number 10 and the Cabinet Office during this period felt fine to me. Again, I go back to, broadly, was I able to input advice to the Prime Minister, or when decisions were being made, I felt I was.
Then the policy he's most closely associated with, Eat Out to Help Out, subsidising people to dine at restaurants in the summer of 2020.
My primary concern was protecting millions of jobs of particularly vulnerable people who worked in this industry. All the data, all the evidence, all the polling, all the input from those companies suggested that unless we did something, many of those jobs would have been at risk with devastating consequences for those people.
But why did he not raise it with the scientists who feared it would increase transmission of the virus?
Why would I raise it as a risk when I didn't believe that it was, because it was designed in the context of a safe reopening? The onus is surely on the people who now believe that it was a risk to have raised it at the time when something could have been done about it if they felt strongly. I'm very clear that I don't believe that it was.
Other witnesses at this inquiry have been scathing of Rishi Sunak's decisions during this period. He was branded Dr. Death by a government scientist and accused of wanting to let people die rather than have another lockdown. He's mounted a staunch defence, but for some of the families here, it was hard to swallow.
The Eat Out to Help Out scheme fueled the second wave, created and fueled the second wave, and that is unforgivable.
Research suggests it drove some infections, but the second wave would have come anyway. The Prime Minister hoping to leave the lockdown arguments behind him as other political storms loom. Tamara Cohen, Sky News at the COVID inquiry.
Well, while Westminster might be obsessing right now with tackling migration and the evidence of the COVID inquiry, the evidence in the country is that people are much more concerned over the cost of living and the NHS. And the financial squeeze on the latter is getting worse, according to analysis by Sky News. NHS trusts could be nearly £5 billion overspent by the end of the financial year. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has more.
Early on shift in the West Midlands ambulance service, and already there's a call. Paramedics Claire and Kelly are dispatched to someone who's been waiting 7 hours for an ambulance, although it is a non-critical case.
Hello, it's the ambulance.
Winter is always busy, but there's added pressure this year. A Sky News investigation by the data and forensics team has revealed that NHS regional boards are overspending hugely. We made freedom of information requests to 42 integrated care systems, or ICSs, in England. They're responsible for allocating the NHS budget and commissioning services in their area. 41 ICSs replied, and all are in deficit. As of September, 6 months into the current financial year, England's ICSs had overspent by an estimated £2.45 billion. If things continue as they are, our analysis suggests that the NHS may spend £4.9 billion more than originally planned, the line going down. The most recent ICS forecast, the line going up, puts that number at around £745 million, still short of break-even. This call is a simple one in the end, but it still requires a trip to Warwick Hospital.
It doesn't seem to ever ease off at all. It puts pressure on us all. We're often waiting outside the hospitals and it delays us getting out to help patients.
We've been riding with Claire and Kelly to see how one of those pathways, a new technology called Consultant Connect, is being used to keep elderly patients out of hospital. Patients like Joyce, who's 90 years old and had a fall this morning.
I'm Kelly. Kelly, it is.
When the paramedics arrive, after they assess the patient,
Heart rate is 87.
they're connected to an expert back at Warwick Hospital. They advise them on whether the patient needs to come into the hospital, and they can also send a specialist team to the patient's home.
Take care, sweetheart.
That means that Joyce can stay at home today, which means more time back on the road to help more patients. This job is high pressure, high demand, but it's also what the NHS looks like just standing still to meet current needs. Our report shows the financial pressure that the NHS is under. And the worry is that money meant to be spent on improvements for tomorrow is instead spent today, so that standing still actually becomes falling behind.
Funds that were actually there to help the NHS become more productive, to see patients quicker or to treat them more efficiently. For example, investing in technology or fixing buildings which are literally crumbling. That money has been diverted to fill the gap in just paying for the day-to-day services.
Frontline services like these simply have to be paid for. But it means that the NHS is constantly spending on today's crisis, which means that the one that comes tomorrow will be even tougher to deal with. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Warwick. Well, tonight, NHS England have responded to our report.
They said, although significant additional costs have been caused by the impact of strike action and higher than expected inflation, further funding has been made available to local areas, which means their remaining year-to-date overspend is £471 million, which is £2 billion less than Sky has estimated. Well, its language you don't have to be a climate scientist to understand is much weaker than many would have hoped. The draft deal at the latest COP summit promises to reduce the use of fossil fuels rather than phase them out altogether. Even the summit's chair admitted there were still many gaps to close. From Dubai, our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, has this report.
This 28th annual climate summit is entering its final phase at the end of the hottest year in recorded history. Remarkable then that a draft agreement emerged with no mention of phasing out fossil fuels. The president of the summit saying nations here must do more.
You know what remains to be agreed, and you know that I want you to deliver the highest ambition on all items, including on fossil fuel language. Let's keep that focus on our North Star of keeping 1.5 in reach.
As things stand, it definitely isn't. 1.5, your North Star, is it still visible right now? Can you give us a... Say again, sorry, sir.
Shining, sir.
Okay, thank you. His star may be shining, but others look bleak. Are you happy with the text as it is, Mr. Kerry?
Excuse me, thank you, sir.
The words of the draft are weaselly. Actions that could include enhance efforts towards doing something about fossil fuels and reducing consumption and production of them by before or around 2050. So who among the thousands of diplomats camped out here is working to water down ambition?
Coal-dependent India is resistant to language around fossil fuels. Russia, rich in gas, is pulling strings behind the scenes too. But the finger of blame is most clearly being pointed at Saudi Arabia, leader of the OPEC club of oil-exporting nations, and it stands accused of using all of its influence to delay or derail these talks.
It seems they may have got their way.
Can you tell me, have you worked to get the fossil phase out of the text?
Silence from Saudi's lead negotiator because talks are ongoing, or quiet confidence in the outcome. Muted inside. Not so out. Dramatic protests, of course. But this play has been running for 30 years because some countries here don't want or can't imagine an end to fossil fuels anytime soon. There's a lot here left to negotiate. Tom Clark, Sky News, Dubai.
Israel's defence minister said tonight that Israel does not plan to have a permanent presence in Gaza and is open to discuss who would control the territory. Yoav Gallant's comments came as the United Nations described the ongoing situation as simply catastrophic, with little aid allowed in. Well, Israeli ground forces and Hamas fighters continue to engage in heavy combat in and around the southern city of Khan Yunis. According to Gaza's health ministry, which is controlled by Hamas, more than 18,000 Palestinians have now been killed since the beginning of the war, including 7,000 children, while close to 50,000 Palestinians have been injured. Only 1% of casualties have made it across the Rafah border crossing to receive treatment in Egypt. Our special correspondent, Alex Crawford, visited the border today with a group of UN ambassadors, a warning that her report includes pictures of some of the war's latest victims.
Only a fraction of aid's getting through to Gaza, and this truck, moving at speed, appeared to have men on top guarding it. At least one of them is armed. But this is sustenance, and it's in scarce supply. People are hungry, thirsty, and desperate. This is a fight for drinking water, nothing more. The alarms from the aid organisations are getting more loud and more shrill, but still no breakthrough yet on any ceasefire or peace plan. Those tasked with saving lives in these conditions say simply it's becoming near impossible.
We are also close to a breaking point because the more the level of desperation increases, the more people are also expressing and channeling their anger against the UN and against UNRWA, which is the face of the international community.
There are yet more horribly familiar scenes of frightened families on the run. These, filmed by the Sky News team in the north of Gaza, suggest there are still significant numbers in an area under intense bombardment for weeks now. And the sounds of war indicate Hamas is still fighting. But Israel's emboldened by its latest show of support from the US, which has led to the lack of political consensus at the UN, so the killings go on. About 40 bodies were brought into Al-Aqsa hospital, many from a strike which flattened a building in the Maghazi refugee camp. About 80 people were inside when the bomb struck. Neighbours counted only 6 survived. We joined an unprecedented trip with UN envoys from the Security Council to the Egyptian Gaza border. The group of diplomats was taken to see the lines of urgently needed aid trucks waiting to be taken into Gaza. The hastily organised tour by the UAE is aimed at getting more aid across the border and stopping the bombing. But Israel's key backer, America, was one of the few who didn't join the field trip, amid signs of growing exasperation from their UN colleagues.
So this is really a tragic event, not only for the Palestinian people, but for humanity, for the whole world. We should not allow it to continue. It has been too long.
The UAE has opened a field hospital in Gaza and had wanted to take the diplomats over, but security issues meant they had to make do with talking to medics inside the war zone remotely. This trip was all about galvanising minds, prompting fresh action and demonstrating what can be done. The UAE opened a desalination plant which they hope will provide fresh water for Gazans, for instance. But it also served to show how America is being isolated over this war.
This is a code red. It is a code red. We have been sounding the alarm. The Secretary General has written a letter to the Security Council invoking Article 99, that this is a threat to international peace and security. We are at code red here. So if the international community does not respond at the speed and pace that is required, we are going to be facing an even more enormous challenge.
The UN envoys could see and probably hear the war happening over the border, and it won't have been lost on them how throughout the debating there are still more than 100 hostages and lives are being snuffed out in Gaza with every day that passes. Lots and lots of them. Alex Crawford, Sky News, on the Egyptian-Gaza border.
Prince Harry has been ordered to pay the Mail on Sunday more than £48,000 after he lost his attempt to strike out part of the paper's defence in a libel case. The Duke of Sussex is suing the newspaper's publisher over an article about his fight with the Home Office concerning his security arrangements, which Associated Newspapers argued expressed honest opinion. Russia's main opposition leader and one of President Putin's fiercest critics, Alexei Navalny, has gone missing in the country's prison system. He was due to be transferred to a special security penal colony, but failed to appear in court via video link today. His lawyers say it's now 6 days since they last had contact with him. 20 properties have been evacuated on the Isle of Wight after a landslip. The main road linking Shanklin and Ventnor has also been closed while the council assesses the impact of the landslide. It is a case with echoes of the agony felt by the parents of Harry Dunn, an American apparently associated with the Secret Service, involved in a car crash, but leaving the UK before he could appear in court. Elizabeth Donoghue was left with 2 broken ankles and a fractured sternum after the accident. She told Sky News today that she felt let down by people she trusted to help. Our Midlands correspondent Lisa Dowd spoke to her.
At times, my ankle can be a bit stiff, yes.
Elizabeth still has trouble walking, more than 5 months after the crash here.
So I just remember something large hurtling towards me.
The nurse was driving home from work along this road in the Herefordshire countryside when it happened. She was left with 2 broken ankles, a broken sternum, and she couldn't walk for 6 weeks. The other driver who was in the crash here is 22-year-old American Isaac Calderon, and it's his identity that is now central to this story. He was charged with dangerous driving, but West Mercia police now don't know where he is after he failed to turn up to court.
I was just horrified, really. I was told that he worked as a spy. Initially, I was told he worked for the American military, and the purpose of his journey was to visit somebody at the SAS in Hereford. They cited the case of Ansakoulas to indicate that he was a flight risk, and that this has happened before, so it's a possibility.
Why didn't you go to attend court in the UK?
Ansakoulas was the US spy who left the UK after killing teenager Harry Dunn in a collision near an American intelligence base in Northamptonshire in 2019. Like Sakoulas, nobody stopped Calderon flying home. Harry Dunn's mum fought for justice for years and is supporting Elizabeth.
The overwhelming feeling for me was that the UK authorities had yet again let another one of its own citizens down.
Shows both of the fractures with...
The British government says that the Crown Prosecution Service are considering what steps to take next in this case. The Americans have refused to tell Sky News exactly what Calderon does. Elizabeth says she simply wants him extradited to face justice. Lisa Dowd, Sky News, Herefordshire.
Well, finally, it is a tale of wartime subterfuge which tricked Hitler into diverting his troops. But one element of Operation Mincemeat remained a mystery to most for nearly 80 years. The body of a homeless man, disguised as a Royal Marine, washed up on a Spanish beach with fake documents, including love letters from his fictitious sweetheart, Pam. Well, Pam's identity was finally revealed to be an MI5 secretary, Hester Leggett, and her role in the plot has finally been honoured, as Sky's Ashna Huranak reports.
Operation Mincemeat the musical tells the story of how British intelligence used the corpse of a homeless man during the Second World War to deceive the Germans as to where the Allies would launch their invasion of Western Europe. Alongside fake top-secret naval papers stashed into his uniform were letters from his fantasy sweetheart.
Your sister sends her love, of course, and your mother is the same as ever.
But there was a real woman behind the ruse, an unassuming administrator used to bulk up the backstory, named Hester Leggett. She caught the attention of fans of the show like Sharon, who wanted to know more.
We found out that she was born in India, and we found out that where she went to school, and we found out that she went to Secretarial College, and that she had joined the War Office, and then somebody found out that from MI5 that she had worked at MI5 during the war.
Hester's involvement in the plot was mentioned in the operation's film adaptation.
He would carry a letter from his wife professing her deep love for him.
Very good.
But now the name no one once knew is for all to see, with a plaque unveiled in her honour.
In our show, Hester herself sings a song with the other female member of the team about how they won't be remembered and how they won't get their flowers and they won't get their medals and they won't get their plaques. And so to have had the show inspire the love and dedication in the fan base to right that wrong, and finally for Hester to be given her moment in the sun and to have a plaque on the Fortune Theatre wall, it's just beyond your wildest dreams.
You make art because you want to inspire people, and then they have come back with this, and it's inspired. And it's inspired us, and it's inspired everyone who will come and see this show now will see this and hopefully be inspired too.
Hester died in 1995, so never got to see the world discover her work. But the story of her key role in a legendary plot lives on. Ashna Huranak, Sky News in the West End.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleeman. Welcome to both of you. Well, among the stories, we will be discussing this in The Guardian, which says the draft deal at the COP28 climate summit has been condemned as weak and insufficient. Back with that and the latest on the Rwanda migration bill as well in just a moment.
5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories tonight. The Prime Minister is facing a challenge from his own MPs who are calling on him to scrap a controversial new plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Rishi Sunak has told the COVID inquiry he has no WhatsApp messages saved from during the pandemic as he rejected criticism of the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. And according to analysis by Sky News, NHS trusts could be nearly £5 billion overspent by the end of the financial year. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines with The Sun's chief political correspondent, Jack Elsom, and the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleeman. Lots to discuss, as ever, tonight. So let us begin then and start with the Metro. Summing up Rishi Sunak's evidence at the COVID inquiry, the Metro has the headline, "I did the right thing." The Daily Mail warns that Tuesday's Rwanda vote could sink his leadership. The Telegraph quotes the former Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who has warned Tory rebels not to wreck the government by voting down the emergency Rwanda legislation. The Eye leads with the headline, Tory rebels in standoff with PM on Rwanda law. And the Times describes the right-wing rebellion as a significant test of Rishi Sunak's authority. Well, The Guardian's front page focuses on comments from delegates at the UN's COP28 summit. The Financial Times reports on the anger being directed at oil-producing countries like Saudi Arabia after references to phasing out fossil fuels was removed from a draft agreement being offered for signature at the COP28 climate conference. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of the papers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to them, to Jack and to Jenny. Welcome to both of you. Now, you've had an interesting day, haven't you? Outside committee meetings all day from early this morning. The Daily Mail describes it as down to the wire. Would you agree?
Completely. And I know that often us political journalists are accused of hyping up events in Westminster, but tomorrow is going to be completely high stakes for Rishi Sunak. Like, make no mistake, he is in a battle to keep his flagship Rwanda plan alive. And he's caught between a rock and a hard place here, because we have right-wing Tory factions who came out with a scathing statement earlier saying the bill doesn't go anywhere near as far enough to address their concerns, that individual claims could still be brought and that Rwanda be bogged down in the courts. Essentially, they want a toughening up. But on the other hand, Rishi Sunak has this one nation group of sort of centrist Tories who at the moment are backing the bill, but are saying that if you toughen it up any more, then we're going to pull the plug on this. And so at the moment, it looks like these negotiations are going to go down to the wire. He's going to spend the next 24 hours lobbying incredibly hard to get this bill over the line. We know he's got this breakfast meeting early doors with the new Conservative rebels. However, you know, it's a fool's game at the moment to really suggest which way this is going to go. If I was a betting man, and I'm happy to eat humble pie, I'd say that they might just get it over the line.
OK,
but we'll see.
That's interesting. Yes, 7:30, where the charm offensive begins. It's going to be a long day for the Prime Minister, certainly. And the consequences are what? I mean, we don't know necessarily, do we?
Well, I mean, it will be incredibly embarrassing, because this is a second reading of a bill. This is about the principle of whether or not you generally agree with the idea behind the bill. This is not about the details of the bill. It's normally down the line that these kinds of arguments would be had. And this Rwanda plan is the new Brexit for the Tory party in terms of them, these irreconcilable factions, these poles of the party being diametrically opposed. You have these One Nation Tories saying, yes, they will support it, but only if there's absolutely no watering down. The right-wing five families, mafia, however they're being described, saying that they will only support it if there are changes. And Rishi Sunak, this is a kind of mess of his own doing, because he is the one who has made Rwanda the centrepiece of all of his campaigning, of what he stands for, that he will be judged on his victory or not on this particular issue. And you've got to think about the fact that he has spent today being grilled by a KC in the inquiry, and actually that would be more relaxing than being outside of the inquiry room. That would be a safe haven compared to what he has emerged into and the breakfasts that he'll be having tomorrow.
Yeah, the factions are fighting again, I think we'd probably describe it as. And in the meantime, the Rwanda is Safe Bill, which I've named it, I know it's not his title. You know, I mean, what do people feel about it generally? Do they just wish it would all go away? Because it's likely it would go to the courts again. And the cost of each court appearance, you know, all of it's so expensive. People have been questioned today about how much this is genuinely going to cost.
And the Downing Street line is that the ability to make claims in the courts will be vanishingly small, is the language which they're deploying. However, Tory MPs on both sides remain pretty unconvinced by that. The One Nation group say, well, actually, we think that individuals should have the ability to make claims in the courts, you know, and that is obviously human rights, which Britain has a big track record of. The other side of the coin is the right-wing factions who go, well, hang on a minute, you know, this whole Rwanda plan, since it was first devised in 2022, has been bogged down in the courts. We've had months and months of delay. You say, Rishi Sunak, you want to get them off by next spring. You have to, essentially. Your career is staked on to get them off by the next election, and therefore it doesn't do anything to address that. And so it's this issue, isn't it, about how bogged down in the courts this plan is going to be. You mentioned costs. We've found out this week that we've spent £290 million on the Rwanda scheme, or, you know, by next year, and not a single migrant has been there. The government, though, came out today, interestingly, published their legal advice for the Rwanda bill, which is very, very rare and usually only happens when they are in a bit of a pickle. And the point they made in that is that they think that if we don't crack this problem of illegal migrants and channel crossings, that the asylum hotel bill will quadruple to £11 billion a year, £32 million a day. At the moment, it's about £8 million a day. So they're trying to focus minds for these Tory rebels and go, we have to solve this, otherwise it's going to get a hell of a lot worse and a hell of a lot more expensive.
So 32 million a day?
32 million pounds a day, equivalent to about £11 billion a year.
And yet, there is, of course, another option, which is that we sort out the backlog so we don't have people in hotels for so long. And they're suggesting that this Rwanda bill, if it were to go through, I mean, there aren't vast numbers of people who would be sent to Rwanda, but their argument is this is deterrence and this is going to stop people from coming, as if the idea of risking your life and dying in the Channel, as so many people have done, is not deterrent enough to stop people. It is a misreading of the situation, I would argue, from all sides, and also of the public mood. And the idea that this is the hill that the Conservative government is going to die on is quite depressing, I think. And also, you know, poll after poll show that this is not necessarily the prime issue for everybody in the country. And we know from the immigration statistics that illegal migration is not the reason for the enormous numbers of migrants into the country that we have. And yet it has become this symbol of the soul of the Parliamentary Conservative Party at the moment. And, you know, it will be very interesting to see what kind of Christmas Rishi Sunak ends up having after this week.
Yes, because people voted to control their borders, one might argue, as part of the Brexit vote. Your byline, inside the Sun, PM facing mutiny on Rwanda vote. The Tory right says the bill is too weak. The Tory left says it must not change. You know, is somewhere in the middle the right answer? Who knows? And the point is, it's not just a deterrent, as Jenny said, it's also a dividing line with Labour, isn't it? And what's Labour's option on what to do to stop the boats? It's almost flushing them out as part of this, isn't it?
Yeah, it's this so-called wedge issue, which we hear Tory strategists mention time and time again. They want to go into the campaign with some clear blue water with Labour because there's not a lot. You know, they can't really point to taxes because taxes have been, you know, hiked up to their highest point since the Second World War. And so immigration is this dividing line which the Tories really want to sort of prise open and get into Labour. Now, Keir Starmer's plan, you know, I'm a political journalist and I would press you to think about what actually is his plan to cut the backlog. This is the point Tory MPs are making. And at least if you're the government, you can say, we have one plan, which is get Rwanda over the line and stop the boats. The problem is that at the moment, they can say that till they're blue in the face, but it's not working. We keep having boats. Rwanda is hanging on a knife edge tonight. And so they need to basically go into the next election saying, we have a plan to cut migration. This is their, they've put all their eggs in this basket. And at the moment, it's not working. And they're going to have to really pull their fingers out if they want to make that into a wedge issue going into the polls.
And the idea that the red wall MPs on the Tory side are the ones who are amongst the group, aren't they? The 5 groups that met today from the right wing of the party, because they believe those voters in that area, which Labour want back, really care about this issue.
Yes, but there's also this feeling that the soul of the Conservative Party is changing. You have Lord Cameron now as Foreign Secretary, and these figures, Damien Green, people who we hadn't heard a lot from the One Nation Tories, even though there are a lot of them, they hadn't had a very loud voice. And now there is a sense that their voices are being amplified for the first time in quite a long time. And yeah, I mean, you're totally right about Labour. This strategy is one of many to try and set elephant traps, because Labour is playing it so safe. There is the idea that the only way they'll be able to campaign in the next election is if they manage to wrong foot Labour, who are playing so frustratingly, ridiculously safe that it's almost impossible to work out what they stand for.
You said Cameron, who's worrying the right of the party. I thought you were going to talk about Farage, actually, who's talking about nibbling at the hems of returning to the Conservative Party on a ticket with Boris Johnson. I mean, who knows? But anyway, what do you think?
Never say never, he came out of the jungle and said today.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice hedge, isn't it, I suppose? Let's take a look at The Guardian, shall we? Picture there of Rishi Sunak arriving or departing. Hard to tell from here. Oh, it's cut off the picture. There we go, never mind. Anyway,
it's on the front of the Metro as well.
Oh, it's front of the Metro as well. Anyway, he's at the COVID inquiry today. Sunak in a desperate bid to avoid Rwanda bill defeat. But anyway, his COVID, if we're talking about that now. I did the right thing. This is on Eat Out to Help Out, the bit of which I suppose he put his head above the parapet the most, I guess.
Yes. He will have had a lot of time to prepare these answers. He would have known that this is what he was going to be asked about. He was much less tetchy than I was expecting him to be, because he doesn't like being asked critical questions. But he had obviously prepared, he'd obviously rehearsed. He said that the scientists, had ample time to say something. There was a month between it being announced and implementation of the policy, which is quite strange, given that the government's line was always that they were being led by the science. So it seems strange that he didn't consult any of the scientific advisors before coming up with this policy. But there were a few quite bizarre...
He said they had a month of notice.
They had a month of notice.
And this was a micro-policy amongst multiple...
Indeed. And you can't say that the wave that came was as a result of this. He did say a few things that were distinctly odd, like this stuff about changing his phone several times and that meaning all the WhatsApps were lost.
Another Prime Minister with no WhatsApp record.
Really very odd. He also, the lapses in memory of major senior people within the Tory administration of what happened in the early months of 2020 is very, very worrying. This whole, I don't recall. When you're making life-changing decisions, asking people to give up their liberty, all came across as a bit disingenuous. But I think he will look at today as a victory, really, because he didn't lose his rag and he didn't criticise Boris Johnson, which is a good way of keeping certain elements of the Conservative Party on side, because it wouldn't go down well if he had thrown his old boss to the wolves.
The other difficult question was was the Treasury seen as the agent of death part of it? Were they on the wrong side of the COVID debate at the start? And his argument, of course, was I needed to protect the economy, and the fact that people have forgotten the reason we're now in the pickle we are in terms of taxation and inability to spend now is because of the expenditure during the pandemic.
Yeah, and he's sort of walking a bit of a tightrope, I think, Rishi Sunak, because on the one hand, he has bereaved families who quite rightly want to see some contrition from their politicians about lives that were lost in the pandemic and potentially what they see as a poorly judged relaxing of the rules. However, what you also see is large elements of the Tory base, lots of people who would support Rishi Sunak, saying, hang on a minute, did we actually go too far with these restrictions? And should we have actually maybe gone, hang on a second, let's be more relaxed about this, because we do have the economy to think about as well. And so he's walking a very narrow path between these two sides. And I think we saw a bit of that today, going, of course I'm sorry. He began with an apology, saying he was deeply sorry for the lives that was lost. However, said, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer in charge of the nation's economy, I have a duty to protect that. And of course, in government, in Cabinet, I'll be making the argument to protect that.
When does Commons rise? When's it all over for him, this stressful few days?
The 19th of December, I think the Commons rises. Yeah, week and a half left.
Anything could happen. Anyway, lots of coverage, obviously, on the Rwanda stuff tomorrow. It's going to be fascinating. And that early meeting at 7:30 in the morning, the breakfast meeting with some of the rebels in Downing Street. Anyway, coming up, anger at many oil-producing countries as a draft agreement at the COP28 summit removes references to phasing out fossil fuels. Back with that and more in just a moment.
Kashani, curator of Spyscape, a New York museum dedicated to the world of espionage. Hi.
Hi.
Wow. Now, I don't know where to start. There's so much rich history here. Let's call it that. Maybe this one might be worth the most. Tell me about it.
So this piece here, all of these objects.
Can we touch it?
Of course, yes. All of these objects will feature in our upcoming episodes on our new podcast.
Tell me about this one.
And this one is particularly special. This is the briefcase that was given to Napoleon every morning, filled with his intelligence reports. So his chief spy master would bring him reports, foreign newspaper clippings, mail that they had deciphered, written in code, written about Napoleon or other important information.
How old is this?
It's over 200 years old. So if you look very closely, you'll see the initials KP. It's the monogram for Kim Philby.
Kim Philby, wow.
The notorious double agent.
Yeah.
And in this binder, his fourth wife discovered upon his death these manuscripts here.
I'll show you those as well.
Unpublished memoir of Kim
that.
Philby. And
This
you
is
can
his handwriting,
see
obviously.
It's his handwriting, his scribbles, his annotations throughout. And what it is he talks about his early life, his childhood, his decision to be recruited into the KGB. And he also talks about early missions that the KGB sent him, where he was assigned to bring in his friends into the agency.
And finally, tell me about these. This is amazing.
So these cute little animation cartoons are actually part of Cold War anti-communist propaganda. They are original animation artworks from the 1954 film Animal Farm, which was secretly funded by the CIA as a way to inhibit the spread of the Soviet rise of communism. And during the Cold War, culture was used as a way to stop the spread of communism without the public even knowing.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview, joined once again, as you can see, by Jack Elsom and Jenny Kleeman. Welcome back to both of you. Let's go to COP28, shall we? Everyone's angry is the front page of the FT. Pressure from oil states forces the language to lose the phasing out of fossil fuels, which had been the great hope, Jenny, of this COP.
Yes, it's all to do with one word, could. The word "could" has been inserted. Apparently, in this current draft, there is a range of actions that countries could take to cut greenhouse gas emissions, and phasing out of fossil fuels is not one of them. Who would have thought that hosting the COP summit in a petro-state, as Al Gore is calling it, would lead to this. But this is incredibly depressing. This is a massive regression, gosh, it would be such a small thing to ask for. Like, we probably shouldn't be doing this thing that's killing the planet. But even then, that is being watered down.
Well, those nations want compensation, don't they? That's
yes.
The point. Is if you're making us lose our main supply for our economy, then we want to be paid for it. and then the poorer nations want to be paid as well, effectively for reparations of the past. It starts to get very expensive, doesn't it? Anyway, Jack, your thoughts?
You're right, and you have this competing interest. You have almost 200 countries here, many of whom who have completely different economies. You know, you have the sort of the petro-states we mentioned who are incredibly reliant on oil exports and other people buying them. And then you have the interests and needs of these smaller states who are saying, hang on a minute, we are the ones on the front line of climate change, bearing the brunt of your producing. And we have the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States today saying, we will not sign our death certificate when it comes to this deal. And so you just sort of see played out in Dubai at the moment, the really sort of disparate interests of all of these nations and trying to get them to come up with a mutually agreed climate document is going to be incredibly difficult. We saw it in Paris, and it really goes to show how much of a sort of feat of human diplomacy that was really. And we see here today played out wrangling, although with these agreements, they usually do go right down to the wire. And so you're wondering whether we might see some coming together of a position, a more sort of harmonious position as things move forward.
Well, you say that, but you just remember COP26 when Alex Sharma was in tears at the compromises in the final minutes. It was Ali, full of drama at that time.
Yes.
And you know, just the frustration of having to make major compromises just to get any agreement. You mentioned Paris, the great, let's leave it at 1.5%, 1.5 degrees rather. No hope of that at the moment, really, in terms of the trajectory of the way our fossil fuel emissions are going. Just a final thought, Jenny, you know, does there need to be another forum or something?
Well, I mean, you know, this is not the final text. There are a few more days to come, but, you know, this cannot be the outcome of all of this. I mean, really, surely, as a civilization, as human civilization, we have to do better than this. And you would hope that this is just a pendulum swing, which is going to force a kind of correction that will mean something better comes out of it. But it's a sorry state of affairs, really.
Yeah, climate draft condemned as weak and insufficient. And, you know, we know that cost of living and the energy crisis after the Ukraine war has left it, you know, as a subject on people's back burners for quite a long time. Anyway, moving on to festive matters. We love a carol, says the Times.
Yes,
Jenny?
we love a carol, and it doesn't matter, apparently, if you're singing the wrong tune, because no one's singing the right tune. Hardly anyone is singing the right tune, according to English heritage. Only a fraction of medieval Christmas carols retain their original score, apparently. And it's entirely possible that in many instances, these were never composed at all. Apparently, we're not dancing enough. We're probably singing the wrong tune. Attitude is everything.
Dancing to carols.
Yeah, we should be doing that. We should be having more of a merry time about it all, apparently. Don't worry about getting it right. It's all about the spirit in which you do it. I mean, not only do I know the right tune, but I'm one of those people who likes to sing the descant very loudly.
Oh, yes, I'm with you. I can't, but I'm with you. And meantime, the parties on the front of the Daily Star. There we go. It's the most cringiest time of the year. Raucous Christmas parties are back, and you'll be sorry. To be fair, that's probably true. And again, working from home Brits get together for the first time in ages.
That's it. I mean, God forbid, having to socialise with your colleagues after 3 years barely seeing them and then having to see them in the office where, you know, potentially alcohol is consumed, although, you know, other options are available. Yeah, of course, it's a frightening affair, isn't it, you know?
Starting to feel like Christmas, isn't it? Anyway, Jack and Jenny, thank you very much indeed. We will see you for plenty more in the 11. For now, here's the weather.